What's up? Welcome back to the Barton and Bud show. We're excited. No coronavirus talk today, Bud. Just pure football talk. We're talking 2020 season. We're talking, forget the opening weekend. We're talking about the final weeks of the season. We're talking about college football playoffs, Bud. And this was, you proposed this exercise, and I love it. And I'm going to go ahead and let you set this up and talk us through what we're going to do here for the next hour or so.
All right, so Barton and I are going to draft potential playoff teams, and we're going to go 8 rounds, so there'll be 16 teams picked. If your team makes the playoff, you get a point. Seems pretty simple. We're each going to take 8 teams. It'll be a snake draft format, and we discussed beforehand. Barton wants picks 2, 3, and then 6, 7. So I get picks 1, 3, 4, or excuse me, 1, 4, 5, etc. After each pick, we'll kind of discuss and say, yeah, I think that was like an obvious pick there, or perhaps I don't know what you're thinking there. You know, maybe I had this team a little bit lower on the board. Probably not a whole lot of hate because, I mean, you're taking the top teams of college football. And for a tiebreaker, we will use, like if we both end up with 2 or we both end up with 1. First of all, if we both end up with only 1 team, then we should probably quit our jobs. But, you know, if we end up with 2 each, which is possible, then we will go to a tiebreaker of teams to make New Year's Six bowls. So basically the access bowls there as a tiebreak. And we should probably do a little kind of charity bet on this. The loser has to pay, I don't know, what do you want to say, $100 to the winner's charity?
Works for me.
All right, cool.
What's the lowest ranked preseason team to make the playoffs? Was it Oklahoma a few years ago when they were ranked like 16th? Do you know
I think that's, where was that Michigan State team ranked that got crushed by Bama?
That's a good question. I don't know what they were ranked.
Because Washington would have been pretty high.
I feel like the Oklahoma, maybe the first year they got in, was the lowest ranked team, and I want to say it was 16th. So our 16 picks, you would hope, would cover all possible options. So hopefully, like you said, we're not stuck with 1 each in here. That would be, hey, that'd be a hell of a season. That'd be fun.
No doubt.
So.
I thought you were going to ask me, what's the lowest amount to charity that we can get away with without people giving us hell for?
Yeah. No, I wasn't going to say that. But look, I got diapers coming up in July. You know, I think 100 I can deal with. And you know, hopefully we still got jobs and everything by then. We'll be good to go.
All right. So a little NFL draft music. All right. So leading off here with pick number 1, I don't think this is going to draw a whole lot of criticism. Team Bud Elliott selects the Clemson Tigers. Clemson, who made the playoff last several years in a row, and they are led by Trevor Lawrence and Dabo Swinney. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have a pretty good feel for what Clemson is. Clemson also got 9 spring practices in, which is more than most of the teams on this list. So I feel pretty good about taking Clemson here. Their schedule is pretty favorable, and I don't really see any game in which they'll be favored by less than double digits. So if you get that kind of recipe from a Power 5 conference, I think you got to go with it.
Was there any hesitation?
Not really. I thought about it and was like, I mean, I'd probably lay like, 1 to 3 on them making the playoff.
All right. So let me ask you this. Had we been, if this exercise was not about a playoff berth, but instead was about you get 16 chances to pick the national champion, would you have still gone Clemson with your first pick?
Yeah, but I think the gap is smaller, right? Like making it and winning it are different things. But in order to win it, you do have to make it. So a major component of winning it is, I mean, obviously that's kind of a truism. A major component of winning it is making it. But I think because Clemson, in my mind, is so overwhelmingly the number 1, I think I would still go with Clemson for my national title pick if I had to pick just one team.
Well, and also I think the Clemson deal too is they still, like every other school we talk about for the most part, is going to have to survive conference play. Clemson, you can just, I mean, they're just pencil them in. I mean, they've locked up that. They're the ACC champ. I think like that would be pretty pretty shocking to me if they didn't win the ACC. All right, so we ready for
Barton's up for 2.
All right. So I guess it doesn't matter whether I just for the sake of my board, I think I'm going to actually go Alabama at 2. I think the big question obviously is quarterback. I think Mac Jones is good enough. I think Bryce Young, I sure would have liked to have had him get a spring ball session in. Had he gotten spring practice in, maybe I'd be even more confident. This feels a little bit like the year when Jalen Hurts didn't start the season as a starter, right? It was that crowd that he was playing behind. Like I think that.
Oh yeah, the game in Dallas.
Yeah. He was Blake Barnett was the starter that year, maybe.
Yeah, it was Barnett. Didn't they have like 3 guys who they were actually looking at?
Yeah, there was a whole crowd, and Jalen Hurts showed up and just kind of took that thing over.
You know who they played in that first game, right? In Dallas.
USC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they opened again this year against USC.
There you go. I like that trivia. So I like Alabama here because there's a little bit of yes, they got to go through the SEC, but there is a little bit of just don't count these guys out. Like all of a sudden they have all this motivational material. Bryce Young can be that guy. I think they returned a bunch of dudes. I think Dylan Moses coming back on defense is a total game changer. They might have been in the playoff last year if Dylan Moses hadn't gotten hurt. So Alabama's always a safe pick. I don't think I have to dig too deep into it. But I do think that I've got kind of a hunch that this is a year that Alabama's got a pretty good shot at winning it all once again. Number 3, you can probably guess. What's your guess on my number 3 here?
You better be taking the Buckeyes.
Yeah, you got to go Ohio State. Justin Fields, quarterback, loaded roster. They've recruited well enough. Ryan Day, second year. This is going to be maybe the most talented roster in all of college football. And I think when you have a roster that talented, you've always got a shot. Now, granted, they've got a tougher road than, say, a Clemson. And I just still think Ohio State is probably our best bet out of the Big Ten and probably the most talented team in the country.
I got to tell you, if we had flipped picks, right, and you had 1 and I had 2, 3, I would have done the exact same thing, and I'm guessing you would have also done the exact same thing that I did in taking Clemson 1. With Bama, I love the floor of Mac Jones and then maybe the ceiling of Bryce Young, right? Like you have that confidence that, all right, this team can get to the playoff with Mac Jones, provided that defense is as good as we think it probably is going to be. And I think it'll be a really strong bounce back year for the defense. On 24/7 Sports, I wrote my 1 prediction for each SEC team. Like I know you wrote your 1 prediction for each Big Ten team. And my prediction for Bama was that their defense was going to be the best since at least 2017. Because they've had 2 years in a row where they had like a good to very good defense, but not that Nick Saban classic, Bama style defense. And I think this will be a really strong bounce back for them. And their schedule is, they do have to play Georgia, but they get Georgia early in Tuscaloosa. A&M comes to Tuscaloosa. Auburn comes to Tuscaloosa. Their 1 road game is LSU. And I feel like LSU will probably take somewhat of a step back this year. With Ohio State, that's probably the only change I would have made. I probably would have taken Ohio State 2 if I really had to do an order on it, and then Bama 3. But it's pretty close. I mean, Ohio State has that trip to Penn State, which is difficult. But is there anybody who has an argument to have a clearly better roster than them? I don't think so. Like you might say, hey, I like this roster a little bit better, but nobody's like a clear better roster than the Buckeyes right now. So I think that's exactly what I would have done with my picks, man.
Yeah, and I think the points you made on Alabama's defense is important because when you look at the way the roster, the way they've recruited over the last couple cycles, because it was so interesting to me when I think back at one of the best Alabama classes of all time was that 2017 class. It was Tua, Najee Harris, Alex Leatherwood, Jedrick Wills, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith. I think Xavier McKinney. Is Xavier McKinney that class? It was just loaded.
I think so.
And And that class ultimately won one national championship, which was their freshman year. And in retrospect, when you think back at that class, it was very un-Alabama class because it was quarterback and skill players largely. I mean, they did, like I said, they have 2 potential first-round draft picks offensive tackle, but it wasn't this class that was just like loaded with front 7 talent. I think they've been recruiting over the last couple years in a way that perhaps this year, like you said, Bud, they get back to having a front 7 that can really impose their will on another team. And that's a little bit of where the confidence lies in Alabama being bounced back isn't even the right term because it was still potentially, I mean, a lot of people still thought they were a top 4 team in the country last year, but this could be a year where they're back to their dominant self, with no slip-ups.
All right, so I'm up now, and I think here's where it really starts to get interesting because we have some choices to make. I'm up for picks number 4 and picks 5, and I'm not gonna lie, I have about 3 or 4 teams here that I really do like, and they're kind of all mashed together a little bit, but I'm gonna bet on track record. This team has made the playoff consistently every year since their guy has been the head coach. That's Lincoln Riley. Give me Oklahoma. I understand the Texas hype in the Big 12, but I'm seeing all this narrative about can he do it with a quarterback he actually recruited, as if it's harder to do that than it is to take a transfer and assimilate the transfer into your program. It's not like Spencer Rattler's a true freshman. He was there last year. I think he was our number 1 rated quarterback on 24/7 Sports, right? Rattler?
He was. Yep.
I mean, the kid can play. Like, he's the guy I really liked out of that class, too, even though I thought the class was down compared to the, Trevor Justin Fields year. Their receiver talent's ridiculous. It's the second year under Alex Grinch there on defense, and I think that continuity should help some. And the schedule is manageable. Tennessee comes to town early, and I think I would like to get that Tennessee team, fairly early. That's a team I think could keep improving over the course of the season. So go ahead and give me Oklahoma there with pick number 4. And for 5, this is the one where I really kind of struggled. I think there's probably 3 teams you could pick here. And I know the trip to Alabama early scares me, but you got to give me Georgia here. I hear Rusty Mansell talk about how good Georgia's defense is going to be, and I just think who on their schedule has the firepower to trip them up if this offense under Monken and under Jamie Newman is anything to write home about. I like their skill talent on the outside with Pickens and those guys, and the schedule's pretty manageable. Like they can actually afford to drop that game at Bama as long as they run the table in the East, which they have done more often than not under Kirby Smart. And for the most part, they beat everybody in the East by double digits. I mean, those games are typically not close. So go ahead and give me Oklahoma at 4 and Georgia at 5.
Yeah. In particular, I was hoping you would get seduced by, like, for some reason, I thought maybe you liked Florida. I don't know if there was another team out there somewhere that would draw your attention. I was hoping Georgia would slide to me because I do think that Georgia is like, if you are looking for this year's LSU, Georgia is the candidate. And I say that I wrote recently about, I think we talked about on the last pod even, how Jamie Newman could be the next Joe Burrow. But the similarities extend beyond just the quarterback. I mean, yes, the quarterback, there's a new quarterback coming in, a transfer that had success at a previous stop, but is getting a whole different fleet of weapons to play with here at Georgia than he ever touched at Wake Forest. The skill positions are elite. The running back room is stacked. They've got a new offensive coordinator in that is being tasked with giving their offensive weapons more of an opportunity to be successful in Todd Monken, and I think he'll be able to do that to a degree. And then the defense is just loaded. And so when we talked last week about can Kirby Smart sort of unleash the offense, sort of take his hands off the wheel a little bit and let him go. That's obviously remains a big question, but I think there's every reason to believe Georgia is capable of being just a dominant team this year. That would have been my number 4 pick outside of those top 3 we talked about. And then Oklahoma, like you said, I think that's just sort of the safe pick. So now, as I hit 6 and 7.
By the way, hey, can I let me just quiz you real quick. Is there any position on Georgia's defense that you're not sold on? I'm just looking up and down this roster. Like Channing Tindall's fighting for playing time. I loved that guy coming out of high school. He was freaky. I mean, the Kobe Dean, Nolan Smith, Adam Anderson, all these dudes are just, they're freaky, man. And the secondary is stupid good as well. They might not give up 30 points all year.
No, 100%. And I mean, they've got, I think that's what's encouraging is not only do they have really good players, they got really good depth. They're bringing in guys that can play as true freshmen and are going to push the guys in front of them. They've got waves of front 7 players that can run at you. Outside linebackers, inside linebackers. They've got waves of back end players that they can run at you. I mean, I feel like there's still this sort of, and I think the fact that they can foster this competition in their roster, in their secondary, the fact that they don't, whoever's going to play that star position is sort of unknown because there's just a bunch of guys that can, and they got to find out who the best one is. I think all those things are, I don't know, the dynamics and the tenets of a roster that can really make some noise. So, no, I'm very much a believer in Georgia for next year. So here's my dilemma now. So I got 6 and 7. You've taken one Big 12 team off the board. I could dip back into the SEC, where we already have 2 teams gone. I could dip into the Big 10, where there's some certainly playoff worthy rosters. I think what I'm gonna do here is a little bit of a gamble. I'm just gonna go ahead and take the field for the Big 12. I'm gonna take Texas, and I'm gonna take Oklahoma State.
Ooh, okay.
And I know that's early for Oklahoma State, but I'm just not going to give you another opportunity. Like, I guess maybe a TCU or Iowa State or someone can make a run. I don't know. I don't really see that. I see it's either Oklahoma, it's going to be Texas, or it's going to be Oklahoma State. And if you look at Oklahoma State's roster, what they returned Chuba Hubbard at running back, a guy that was a day 2 pick this year, more than likely, which is why he came back. He's going to be playing to be a first rounder this year at running back. You've got Spencer Sanders at quarterback, who's going to be in year 2 as a starter. Athletic. I think he could take a leap there. And you've got Tylan Wallace at receiver coming back after getting injured last year. He's another guy that could have been in the NFL this past year. And I think they have like 10 of 11 guys coming back on defense. So I just think if you're expecting the Big 12 to get somebody in, and that's certainly not a given, but more likely than not, the Big 12 will have somebody in. If it's anyone but Oklahoma, I think it's going to be Texas or Oklahoma State. So a little early to go off the board with Oklahoma State, but I like my chances there of them having a good season. And I think with Texas, if it's not this year, when is it going to be? They got an experienced quarterback that's one of the best in the country. Tom Herman has brought in a couple of new coordinators that ideally breathe some life into both units. If they stay healthy on defense, is a game changer. I mean, that's been a big issue over the last year, particularly in the secondary. They'll be healthier at running back, have some experience coming back on the offensive line. They've recruited well at wide receiver. There's no excuses for Texas to not be capable of making a playoff run. I don't necessarily expect it to happen because we really haven't gotten the indication that it will. But again, this is more of a playoff of you taking Oklahoma off the board. I'm just going to go ahead and say, give me the rest of the Big 12.
All right. So with Texas, I'm pretty much on record here on Twitter at my prior place of employment. I wanted Texas in 2020. I was not a Texas 2019 guy. I thought that, like, at best, 2019 was sort of going to be like a maintain the gains type year that they made from 2018. But, like, I don't know, not us, but some of the media hype train on Texas last year I thought was unwarranted because they weren't really looking at what Texas was actually bringing back and what they were having to rely on from a youth and depth standpoint at some of their positions, especially on defense. And I do wonder, like, was firing both coordinators an overreaction to not living up to what was, in my opinion, unjustified hype? But they did it, and now they have to live with it. I like the pick though because I was going to take Texas at 8, right? I mean that's what I was going to do. So you only jump them up by a spot, and I had Oklahoma State penciled in here if I could get them at 12. But I understand the pairing because if Oklahoma slips up at all, I totally get it. And so my favorite thing about Oklahoma State that you didn't say, because I think you said a lot of great points, but getting Chuba and Sanders to come back is great. Barton, their non-conference schedule is Oregon State, Tulsa, and Western Illinois. Then they travel on the road to TCU. But this is Mike Gundy with basically 3 weeks to prep. Like, none of those games are threats at all. They can work. I mean, they can work a TCU type day in practice every week without even telling these kids it's a TCU day, right? They can be like, you can just rep some concepts, getting real familiar with what TCU does. And I think TCU is going to be pretty salty this year. So I really like getting them early for Oklahoma State off those 3 sort of pseudo bye weeks, if you will. And actually, they have a bye week before TCU. So they go Oregon State, Tulsa, Western Illinois, bye TCU. Like, if Okie State drops that TCU game, no excuses for that. I think they should go on the road and get that win. But here's the other cool thing. Look at their non-conference games this year. And when I chart the Big 12, if one of your road games is at Kansas, that's a big deal because that means you're not having to play another road game at a place where you can actually lose. And I don't think Kansas is a legitimate threat to beat them. At Baylor, I think we both probably think this is a bit of a rebuilding year for Baylor. And then at Kansas State, which I just don't know if Kansas State is going to be able to score with Oklahoma State this year. They lost so much up front on the offensive line. Yeah. that could make a difference. I mean, you could argue K-State will be better by year end, and then they close the year with Texas on a Friday, and Texas has to travel and play on short rest. The one game that I think you project them to lose is at my pick, Oklahoma. But if Oklahoma State handles its business, it will have a rematch against Oklahoma, probably, or Texas. I mean, hell, that'd be pretty nice for you if the Big 12 title game is Texas Okie State. But they're going to have probably 2 bites at the apple if they handle their business in these other games. So I think they very well could be favored in probably 11 of their 12 ball games. So that I like that pick, actually. And now I'm not going to say that I should have picked them at 4 or 5. You know, I think it's just kind of how the draft board fell. But in hindsight, if you had not picked Okie State there, maybe I should have actually gone Texas Okie State at my picks here with 8 and 9.
That's the thing with, like, because I know at 6 and 7, those probably aren't the 6th and 7th best teams in the country if I were to just rank the teams. But I look at the opportunity. I don't want to miss the opportunity at getting both of them. Hey, one injury, a quarterback for Oklahoma, and all of a sudden I'm sitting pretty. So I'll take it, even knowing I was kind of gambling on where you had Oklahoma State on your board.
All right, so now I've got a decision to make because I think there's one team that's pretty obvious here, and there's one team that I don't really have a strong feel on, but I think I kind of have to do it to play for a potential block here. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Florida Gators with my number 8 pick. They return a whole lot. I looked at them for my SEC one prediction per team piece, and I really think their run game will be much improved this year. That was an issue last year. If you looked at Florida's yards per carry, it was fine, right? But if you looked at their success rate, shout out Bill Connolly for some of those advanced metrics, it was really poor. Florida had several runs of 60, 70, 80 yards that sort of inflated their yards per carry total, but they were not very good gaining yards when they needed to and staying on schedule. This year, I think that offensive line grows up a little bit better. It's pretty rare for a Dan Mullen football team to not be able to run the football, and I think that they'll be able to do much better with that this year. And Kyle Trask returns with an offseason. I mean, not much of one, but returns as the returning starter this year. And in my opinion, this basically locks up one team in the SEC title game for me, right? With having Georgia and having Florida. In fact, if one of those two teams gets to Atlanta undefeated, they actually could, in theory, lose that title game and still go, depending on what happens in the other conferences. And I guess I'm just going to be an SEC homer here, and I'm going to follow up with LSU. I'm not super high on LSU, but I do think Ed Orgeron has something special going there. I don't think they were just a flash in the pan one-year wonder. I actually think they're going to be one of the top national title favorites in 2021. But in case I'm wrong, in case that they arrive, or not arrive, but in case they just stay around a little bit more than I think they will, to me, I feel pretty good sitting here with Clemson and then teams 2, 3, 4 in the SEC with you having Alabama.
No, I definitely like the pairing of Florida and Georgia. East is going to get into the playoffs eventually, and you've got a pretty good shot there. And like you said, they could get in without even winning the conference. LSU's an interesting one. Honestly, I had LSU lower on the board for me. There seems to be some Miles Brennan confidence. I have no doubt that the talent around him is good enough to run it back. I mean, Jamar Chase returns. Trey Palmer was like a 10-400 meter guy that just got his feet wet last year. Terrace Marshall comes back at receiver. Those young running backs now sort of step into their role as the feature backs. Like, there's a lot of reasons why LSU could just keep this thing chugging. I couldn't get there, particularly when you look at just sort of the rest of the conference. The amount that they have to replace is up on defense. It was nice they got the North Dakota State transfer here recently at linebacker. That helps, but right or wrong, I would have been a little bit lower on LSU. I think Florida's fascinating because I have as much confidence in Dan Mullen as a coach on game day as anyone in the country. And by game day, I don't even necessarily mean like play calling. I just think general structure, general game plan, being able to exploit another team's weaknesses, being able to minimize your own. And then I think he did a really good job of that last year with Kyle Trask. I mean, it was all this short pass game stuff. It was utilizing a pretty deep receiving core. But a lot of those guys are gone this year. Everyone's sort of got the blueprint on Kyle Trask's strengths and weaknesses. I'm really interested in seeing what Florida looks like. And like you said, maybe the answer there is the run game becomes a much more central part of the equation. Because it flashed last year too, but I would have been very tempted to roll with Florida in this next set of picks for me as well. So
let me ask you this: if I had not taken LSU, and you now have picks 10 to 11, was LSU going to be there for me at 12?
Yeah, I think they would have.
Damn. All right. Okay. That's kind of the game theory of this. You had to think: is Bud going to push up Texas or Okie State? I had to think, all right, is Barton going to take LSU? And I'm not going to lie, like 9 felt high for LSU, but 10 and 11, especially that 11 spot, I'm like, I don't know. Is there an obvious team? Like, is there an obvious 2? Is Barton going to snake LSU for me there? I don't know. That's kind of what makes this fun. Hopefully, fun for the listener as well.
Okay, so I've got about, circling them right now. There's like 4 teams right now that I think you want. That I feel confident you want, I should say.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick the Pac-12. I'm going to pick Oregon, and I'm going to pick USC. Yeah. And the USC pick, to me, is really interesting. So let me go. We'll call it, for the official ledger, we'll go Oregon at 10, USC at 11. So, Oregon, like sort of self-explanatory, that they were the best team of the Pac-12 last year. They return a loaded defense, really. I mean, the the potential hit that could have taken from the NFL draft was absorbed when a lot of those guys decided to come back. Kayvon Thibodeau's in year 2. Obviously, they need a quarterback, but I feel good about the ability to go out and get a transfer in Anthony Brown from Boston College. Not even necessarily because he's going to be the answer, but because now if Tyler Shuck is the quarterback, he beat out Anthony Brown instead of beating out some guys that have never played before. And so whoever the quarterback is, it's someone that we can have confidence in. I think the receiving group's going to be improved. Running backs are the running backs back, and offensive line, Mario Cristobal is going to take care of that. So I think this Oregon is probably the safest Pac-12 champion pick. USC, I was looking at USC here recently. I think it might have been for the Cover 3 podcast. We were talking Pac-12 South. And just looking at the USC roster, like maybe I am compromised in the way I look at USC because of my recruiting background, because we've ranked their classes high. The names all resonate to me. But that is a talented roster, man. Like, Keith Slovis is a quarterback who we all think is very good. He's going to be in year 2 with Graham Harrell. But how many times now have we seen a college football playoff participant trotting out a backup quarterback because of injury, because any number of different factors? Well, JT Daniels is their backup. So if they get banged up, JT Daniels can just pick up the baton. You've got a receiving group that is one of the best in the country with Tyler Vaughns and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Drake Metcalf and whatever. This is a group that is it Drake Metcalf? Is that their other receiver's name? Drake Davis? Not Drake Davis. This is a loaded group of receivers. The running back room is deep. Vi Malapai, Stephen Carr, the kid from Indiana who was a freshman last year, who I'm always Marquise Stepp.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of different types of backs they can utilize, and then defensively, again, you got guys like Jay Tufele and Marlon Tuipulotu, and these guys that were like borderline 5-star prospects. And yes, I am disappointed in the way USC has developed some of their elite players, especially in the defensive trenches. But a fresh voice on the defensive side of the ball coming in, a defensive coordinator, a really salty group of linebackers, former studs at defensive back that, if they're all healthy, it's a pretty good room. I just think there's a lot to like from a talent perspective of USC. And then when we talk about the schedule, I actually kind of like that they're playing Alabama up front. I think Alabama wins that game, but if USC comes out there and is somehow just competitive, if that's a 1 or 2 score game, like a 10-point game, and somehow that they can have a really use that as a springboard for the rest of the season, yeah, they probably have to kind of run the table the rest of the way. But I think that with that roster, it's not inconceivable that USC could put together that kind of a bounce back year where Clay Helton's sitting there on the hot seat.
So we think a lot alike. Because I had these guys, both of them, literally right there. I'm a little surprised they lasted this long. I did choose the SEC over them last time, and when you told me you weren't going to take LSU at 10 or 11, I was like, all right, well, pretty sure I know where he's going here. And I think the logic is this: like, they can afford a loss to Ohio State or to Bama, but it can't be like a blowout loss to where the rest of the country thinks they don't belong on the national stage. They're just out west. Let's just forget about them. But I think if they're good enough to avoid that blowout loss to an Ohio State team or to this Bama team, then the logic follows that they're probably good enough to run the table in the Pac-12 and be a 12-1 champion. So I like that. I will never forget Slovis. I went pretty heavy in the live wagering on Utah when they knocked what's his name out, when they knocked Slovis out of the game, and then who was the third stringer for USC who just
Dink. He was just throwing up bombs.
It's like 500, dude.
Yeah. And Michael Pittman, and so that was a layup that USC wasn't going to be great the next game, because if you actually watched the way Fink was playing in that game, you knew that this was not going to work 2 games in a row. And so I can't even remember what USC did the following week, but I remember
Wasn't it the roadie at BYU?
Yes, I think that's right. And I was on BYU that week because, hey, week 1, backup guy throwing bombs, that might work, but not week 2.
Yeah. So I like these picks. I've seen a lot of Anthony Brown, and I was like, well, Oregon's a team I kind of feel runs the ball too much. And Boston College is a team that probably ran it a little bit too much. Like they had A.J. Dillon, who was awesome, but everybody knew they were going to run the ball all the time. He's very experienced throwing off play action. He actually can throw the deep ball pretty well. I think that could work there. I'm maybe not quite as high on Anthony Brown as you are, but again, I can't hate these because these were probably going to be my 2 picks here at 12 and at 13. So, all right, I guess it's time for you to make some picks. And I have, to me, I think there's 3 teams here you can look at, and I'm obviously not going to say all 3 on the chance that one drops to me with my final pick. But
to be clear, there are 3 teams right now that I am interested in as well. So
okay.
We might be talking about the same 3. I'm hoping that you got a different, maybe one substitute in there somewhere, and I can get 2 of my 3.
All right. So at pick 12, go ahead and give me Penn State.
That was one of them.
All right. I have to counter your pick of Ohio State. Ohio State has to go to Happy Valley. I don't love the quarterback situation here at Penn State, but I don't hate it, right? Like they could make the playoff. Penn State's clearly one of these teams to me that I don't think they could win at all. But I could see them making the playoff and making a run. They've come damn close in prior years. That defense is going to be really salty. At times, we saw some teams rattle Justin Fields last year for a quarter, sometimes like 20 minutes. Usually it wasn't the whole game, and part of that was related to him being banged up at the end of the year. But the athleticism on this Penn State defense really does it for me, man. They are so athletic. I mean, I look at it. Brandon Smith is now playing for them. You have Micah Parsons. The difference makers they have with the big, fast athletes, first of all, that can clearly help them beat Ohio State, but I also think that will help them avoid slip-ups within the conference. I just don't think there's enough offenses in that league who can put up enough points on them. We'll see what Michigan looks like. I'm not the biggest fan of Michigan's quarterback situation, so I guess we'll see on that. So go ahead and give me Penn State there at 12, and then give me the Irish. They do have to play Clemson, which is clearly the potential stumbling block here. But Clemson is a team that I have, and if this Irish team if they take down Clemson, this is almost my Clemson insurance. I really don't want Clemson insurance from within the ACC because I think if any team beats them. Like the ACC is not going to have a non-Clemson playoff representative, I don't think. The Irish are sort of my Clemson loss insurance. Clemson has to go to Notre Dame later in the year. I think the offense is going to be dynamite. I like Hamilton on defense. And the other thing is, I think if they play a really close game against Clemson, there's enough names on this schedule to where perhaps an 11-1 Notre Dame team could still get into the playoff. I don't think it's super likely, but I mean, we're down here at pick 13, so you have to kind of think about possibilities. Stanford could bounce back some this year. We'll see. That could be a name win. They get Wisconsin in early October at Lambeau Field, so that'll be a game people really remember. Pitt should be a bowl team. Louisville should, again, probably be a bowl team, and they get that one at home, so that'll be a nationally broadcast game on NBC. And then they finish in the Coliseum against USC. So go ahead, give me the Irish here. First is Clemson insurance, and then second, I mean, maybe they're able to do it without.
Yeah, one of the things that scared me away from Clemson or from Notre Dame a little bit was I was doing Big Ten on 24/7 Sports. You can find right now my one prediction for every Big Ten team. And as I was looking at Wisconsin's schedule, I was actually surprised to see they got Notre Dame. So this Notre Dame schedule, yes, it's got USC, which it always has, and it has Clemson, which is going to be a big one. And then I saw Wisconsin sneak up on there, and then I just sort of got a little scared of the schedule. Now, I will say, as I really sort of look at this a second time, look, they should beat Navy. They'll beat Arkansas. They'll beat Western Michigan. They'll beat Wake Forest. I mean, I guess Wake Forest could conceivably win, but I think Notre Dame's at a point where they don't have to sweat that kind of a game. I don't believe in Stanford yet. Pitt, like the rest of the schedule is a very ACC schedule. And so I guess Notre Dame really, it really is in a lot of ways probably a 3-game schedule. So maybe I didn't give Notre Dame enough credit on my initial glance. I'm not the most trusting of Ian Book. There's some quarterbacks I feel more comfortable with. So this was not one of my 3.
This was not one of your 3. Okay.
No. Penn State certainly was, and I think, look, here's my. So here we are in April, right? And we're predicting college football playoffs, and in this role, we go about, like, we start predicting national champions and playoff contenders in April, and then we have to either change our pick or double down over the next 5 months. And so sometimes you get boxed into corners, sometimes you make several different predictions. So I think I had a few different national title predictions along the way last year. But for our Facebook show on 24/7 Sports, we had a preseason show where we sort of used this like process of elimination method of finding a national title contender. And we wanted to do it. We weren't trying to find someone off the beaten path, but we wanted to like be honest about the approach. And as we use sort of the important factors, critical factors in crowning a national title, we whittled the list down to LSU. We landed on LSU. And so I'm not saying I picked LSU as my official pick last year, but that process actually led us to LSU, which we kind of were like laughing at the time, and then but sort of the more we thought about it, it made sense. LSU goes and wins a national title. And that process is really about 4 things. It was about, do you have a quarterback? Because that disqualifies you if you don't. Do you have the prerequisite talent? Because that disqualifies you if you don't. Do you have the schedule? Because that can, I think, qualify you. I don't think it's a barrier of entry, but it can boost someone into contention that might not otherwise be by a favorable schedule. And then do you have a coaching that is going to limit you from that? So as I look at Penn State, this is a long way getting to Penn State. As I look at Penn State, I'm just worried about the quarterback, and you are too. It sounds like.
Yeah.
But like that's my only fear of making a Penn State prediction. They have a good quarterback who is capable of getting them in Big Ten championship contention. He would be out of place in the college football playoffs, I think, which is sort of my fear in predicting them getting there. And,
there's a bit frankly, of like
same thing with Notre Dame in a way. I mean, we've seen Ian Book in a playoff setting. It's not all on him, but he did look a little Jake Browning-ish from the Washington appearance. It'd be nice to be able to hang your hat on a quarterback that you have full confidence can handle that setting and that road to get there.
And our last 4 picks clearly have one of those things to ding them at least, right? With Penn State, like Penn State reminds me a little bit of like 2018 Clemson. Nasty front 7. Nobody really thought Kelly Bryant was going to be able to win a national title, but they were able to make it. I think if we're picking teams to win the national title, which, hey, we might do at some point, like maybe Penn State's a little bit lower because of the quarterback. Do you think Anthony Brown can win a national title? To me, probably not. Right. USC has the Clay Helton issue, which is is your coaching on game day and program management a little bit sketchy so far? Survey says yes. And then Irish, I agree. I think Notre Dame has some quarterback issues for sure there. Okay, so I'm interested to see. Clearly, Penn State was one of your teams, but you're about to hit me with the other 2 to finish off your draft, aren't you?
Yeah, and look, I think that both of these, in fact, both of these teams that I'm about to pick here actually align pretty well with that criteria. So I'll go with, at 14, Texas A&M. And then at 15, I'm going to go Minnesota.
Ooh.
So if you look at – let's start with Minnesota first. All right, so Minnesota returns their quarterback. And I think that Tanner Morgan is really good. Is Tanner Morgan a playoff quarterback? He might be. I don't think you can say with certainty that he's not. But he's certainly, I mean, he's probably the second best quarterback in the Big Ten heading into the year. So I think you've got that. You have, look, do they have do they have the NFL talent roster? You know, probably you would say no at this point, but look, they're going to have one of the best wide receivers in the conference. They're going to have one of the bigger offensive lines in the conference. They've got a defensive unit that has got has the right body types and athletes. So I actually think that this team is more talented probably than it gets credit for. They don't recruit at the level that you sort of need to be a consistent national title contender. But I do think that the way PJ Fleck recruits gives them a chance, because they recruit high upside guys. They don't recruit high floor guys. They recruit high upside guys. It's a little bit like the Baylor method too. I mean, all the guys you see going to Minnesota, they're often multi-sport guys. They're often guys that play multiple positions. They're often guys that are just sort of untapped. And so I think the talent is closer than maybe Minnesota gets credit for. Coaching, I don't know. I do think it hurts that they lost Kirk Karacha again to Penn State. Mike Sanford comes in. We'll see what he can do in year one. But, that's a question mark, the offensive coordinator spot, as they try to incorporate and install a new offense. PJ Fleck is certainly an elite coach. Does he get over that hump to the national college ball playoffs? I think he's capable of it. So I certainly don't think he disqualifies them. And then here's what's really compelling is if you look at their schedule. First of all, they miss Penn State and Ohio State out of the East. They've got Iowa at home. They've got Wisconsin on the road, yes, but Wisconsin, that's going to be the week after that Notre Dame game at Lambeau. So I think that's a pretty good – if you're going to have to go on the road to Madison, that's not a bad place to get it. So then they got Michigan at home, and their other road games are Maryland, Illinois, Michigan State, and Nebraska. That is a very manageable schedule. So, again, when you hit the bullet points of what are the traits or the characteristics that give you a chance to get in the playoffs, I think actually Minnesota has a lot of them. So I think that's one to watch. Texas A&M, a lot of similarities there. Kellen Mond, I mean, I don't know what the hell we're dealing with Kellen Mond. He's got a first-round arm. He's got a first-round body. Got first-round athleticism. But sometimes he looks like a frat kid quarterback out there just winging it. And sometimes he looks like a first-rounder. And so can he finally take that leap to consistency under Jimbo Fisher? I think, again, when you're talking about ceiling versus floor, he definitely has the ceiling to be a college ball playoff quarterback. So I think that's something that is, if I'm getting them here at 15 or 14, I'll take that. Secondly, this is a talented roster. I think it wasn't ready maybe last year. Certainly wasn't ready 2 years ago. And it's still probably a year away heading into this year. But they returned 19 starters. There's going to be some guys that were backups last year that beat out starters from the previous year. There's going to be a really talented freshman class coming in that can help them. And then I got to pull up this Texas A&M schedule real quick. But the schedule is very favorable. I mean, last year it was just a ridiculous schedule where they really never had a fighting chance. But this year, with a better team, better roster, more experience, they've got Abilene Christian, North Texas, and Colorado in the non-conference, along with.
I've got it memorized now because I've written 3 or 4 long forms about this.
Yeah, we'll have at it. Yeah, I mean, this is a beautiful, beautiful setup.
It really is. So their teams from the East this year, I believe, are South Carolina and Vandy, right? Which is, I mean, you can't get an easier draw than that from the East. They do have to go to Bama. So this is kind of Bama insurance for you, right?
Yep.
You took Bama. That's a game that Bama could lose in theory. There's very few on that tied schedule. I put A&M in my coaches in pivotal years piece in one of my first weeks at 24/7, and their fans were pissed about it. And I was like, look, this is not a hot seat piece.
Right.
This is you got to cash in here. Like this is your 3 years of recruiting. This is the easiest schedule you have had in quite a while, and probably will have in quite a while. Like there's nobody who wants this season to be played more than A&M, right? Like they don't want to lose the schedule. Like they've got to cash this in, and they have the real schedule to do so. I think they're at Auburn, which is probably, if you had to put a line on it, kind of coin flippy. I don't think either team would be a huge favorite there. LSU comes to town. Their non-conference is like a cakewalk. This was my other team of my three. When I said I had three with Penn State, Notre Dame, and the other one was A&M. With Minnesota, I actually don't hate that. Like I wasn't really thinking ahead to my 16th pick quite yet. I was hoping A&M would drop, but that's probably pretty foolish. And like with Minnesota, if they have to throw more, will Tanner Morgan be able to do it? They're another one of these teams that ran the ball so much last year that when they did throw it, they almost always had favorable numbers and favorable matchups. We talked about they don't really recruit at that national title level, and that's true. But like a guy like Rashad Bateman, Florida State and Georgia wanted him pretty badly, and he was a win for Minnesota of the early signing period because PJ Fleck gets in there and he works his magic on these kids, and it's like they don't flip when the other big schools come calling. In fact, I kind of want to write about that later this summer when I get a chance to. Minnesota does a great job of keeping some of those kids who they're on early, and they don't end up flipping to other schools, whereas some schools will kind of have a kid committed for 8 months and then all of a sudden he flips away. And that's tough. So last pick of the draft here, pick 16. And I can just kind of, you don't have any more picks, so I can just tell you who the four teams left on my board are. All right.
You got four more guys, teams that you're messing around with.
Yeah.
I'm
really
almost cast here at this point.
I really didn't need to rank this far, I realized, because there's only 16 rounds, so you probably shouldn't go ranking 20 teams. So I've got Auburn. I've got Michigan. I've got Wisconsin. And I've got Washington. And other than that, do you have anybody on your list that I didn't list there?
I have one team that you didn't list.
I'm gonna feel pretty stupid for it. All right, probably.
No, you're not gonna feel stupid. It's not obvious.
Got it.
I'm just curious if you care to take a guess.
Is it a G5 team? Is it Boise?
No, it's not G5.
Okay. Miami with Derek King.
No, but it is ACC.
You're not going Carolina, are you?
I'm not going Carolina. They made my board, though.
Okay.
Carolina made my board. Probably a year early there. Maybe Carolina is a more defensible pick in 2021. But look, we're talking 16th pick at this point. So, they were an option that I was willing to entertain.
I don't hate that. I'm going to go ahead and give me Wisconsin.
Okay, sell me on this. This is interesting.
Yeah, I really kind of feel like all these four teams are, like, if you had to put odds on these, nobody is less than like 15-1. I wouldn't think, right? Of making the playoff. Wisconsin has a manageable schedule with the exception of playing Notre Dame, but they have that Notre Dame game that can kind of get them up there. I don't really like. I think Wisconsin has a better chance of beating Ohio State if they get there on a neutral site than Michigan does going on the road to an Ohio State team that is just absolutely, like, Ryan Day has Michigan's defense's number. They put up 50 like every time they play, and so even if Michigan improves by like 2 touchdowns, Ohio State's still scoring 35 on them in Columbus. With Washington, I thought about it, but the schedule's not that friendly. I don't know if their non-conference has enough potentially like skins that you could rack up. Auburn, I think, is probably the number 4 team in the West, and I did consider Auburn here just to try and have what I think would be 4 of the top 6 teams in the SEC with you having Bama and A&M. It was sort of like process elimination, and if Wisconsin can get there, they played Ohio State tough for about 40 minutes last year. Like I thought Ohio State would just come out after halftime and just beat them up, and Wisconsin actually had something for them in that first drive or two out of the half, and then Ohio State kind of said, yeah, guess what? All right. But who knows? What if Justin Fields gets banged up against Michigan and they have to go play and Wisconsin beats them and they're, I don't know, 12-1 or something like that? It's also somewhat of Notre Dame insurance for me. And I do think that with these last couple picks, I don't want to mention this to kind of give away my strategy, but if we end up with 2-2, you do kind of have to think about New Year's Six Bowl possibilities. Wisconsin could be an Orange Bowl team. So could Notre Dame. Penn State, I could easily see going 11-1, losing to Ohio State, and because Ohio State makes the playoff, maybe they're the Rose Bowl team. I don't know. I'm just trying to think about maybe like who has the best chance of a New Year's Six. I really don't see Auburn as a New Year's Six team.
So I would have gone with Wisconsin there as well.
Okay.
So I was asking you to explain, not because I wasn't sold on it, but just because I wanted to hear your reasoning. Because Wisconsin is like, they're a curious team to me because on first glance, okay, Jonathan Taylor is gone. Quintez Cephas is gone. They're backfilling some on the offensive line. It feels like if this is a team that has to lean on Jack Cohn to generate their offense, that scares me a little bit. And Jack Cohn is a guy I like, but I like him in that Wisconsin role of a game manager to complement the run game. And is the run game going to be as dominant? Maybe I'm underselling it. Maybe I'm underestimating it. What has me, I think, more confident in Wisconsin is the defense. And in some ways, the offense and perhaps the limitations that their offense might run up against might be even like a better sell on the idea that Wisconsin is going to intentionally keep all these games short, intentionally play their style of football, intentionally lean on their defense, which brings back some really good players. And this is just one of those Wisconsin teams that you don't know how they win. You don't know like where their points are coming from, but all of a sudden you look up and they're 11-1 or 10-2, and they're playing in the Big Ten championship game. And so obviously, if you're 10-2 and playing in the Big Ten championship game, then you got a shot at the playoffs. So that would have been where I would have gone as well.
All right, let's recap this then. So Barton ended up with Alabama, Ohio State, Texas, Okie State, Oregon, USC, A&M, and Minnesota. And again, in order here, I got Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, Florida, LSU, Penn State, Notre Dame, and Wisconsin.
All right. So as I look at this, if there was a round robin or some sort of a jumble the players up and we'll pick 8 teams to play your 8 teams, and your collection of teams and talent is better than mine. I think you have more blue bloods. I think you have probably teams that would win against my team in some postseason bowl challenge. But I think my strategy was geared more towards finding those conference champions. So it'll be interesting. I don't know how confident I am. I don't know if I'm confident or not. But
if Alabama runs it,
strategy.
If Alabama gets it for you, then I really like your odds. Like if Alabama can be as much of a lock for you as Clemson is for me, then I think you'll take it.
Right.
If Bama doesn't take it home for you, then you're really relying on Oklahoma faltering or the committee putting a Pac-12 team in.
Or Jimbo getting his groove back.
Right, exactly. And then Jimbo would have to beat Georgia as well, probably in the SEC title game.
Yeah.
This was fun, man. I think 16 was the right number of teams to pick.
It was the perfect number. We would have stayed. We're starting scratching the barrel after that. Look, Auburn, Michigan, Washington, like you mentioned, those are all good teams. North Carolina, like I mentioned, that's a hard sell that those teams in this year, given what is coming back. Auburn just lost all those defensive linemen. Michigan's got a quarterback competition. Maybe Washington, this is the year, but they got to find a new quarterback too. Hard sell for those teams, I think. I think we got the right number.
All right, let us know in the iTunes reviews once you give us those 5 stars just how stupid we were, or like let us know what team you think's going to win this, Team Barton or Team Bud. It obviously we have a lot of time to kill here before the season kicks off, but we do appreciate your 5-star ratings on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to this show. It's available now, I think, on all the major platforms. I really enjoy doing it. We might actually be back with a little special bonus episode, maybe early next week, maybe over the weekend. So just watch your feeds out there. And Barton, good luck to you.
Good luck to you, bud. Holla.
All right.